are moments in life when everything seems fine on the outside, but deep inside, something feels off. A quiet whisper in your soul. A tension you can't explain. A door that slams shut before you can walk through. These aren't coincidences. These are warnings from God. Signals from heaven trying to get your attention before it's too late. A man once ignored these warnings. He was successful, wealthy, admired by many, but he was too busy chasing the world to notice the signs. The late night anxiety, he called it stress. The loss of real joy, he blamed it on temporary exhaustion. The constant roadblocks, he pushed through, believing he could force his way forward, until one day it all came crashing down. His marriage, his health, his peace, gone. And as he sat in the ruins of what was once a great life, he finally realized God had been warning him all along. God warns us not to harm us, but to save us, to shake us before the fall, to wake us up before we lose what we can never get back. And if you hear these 5 warnings from God, do not ignore them. When the people around you keep saying the same thing, listen. When the ones who love you say, you've changed, you're different, something's not right, pay attention. God often speaks through others. You may not see what's happening, but they do. When friends, family, or even a stranger confirms what your soul already suspects, don't let pride silence their voices. Don't let arrogance blind you. God sends people to rescue you before it's too late. When everything starts falling apart, stop forcing it. When every door slams shut, when no matter how hard you try, things just won't work, pause. Take a step back. Maybe you're not being rejected. Maybe you're being redirected. God is saying, not this way, not this path. But the problem is we don't listen. We keep pushing. We get angry. We blame the world, the system, other people. But what if the delay is divine? What if the roadblock is His protection? When your peace disappears, something is wrong. God speaks in the quiet, and when you are on the right path, peace follows. But when anxiety, restlessness, and a deep sense of unease won't leave you, it's not just stress, it's a warning. How many people ignored that feeling before making the worst decision of their lives? How many felt something was off before marrying the wrong person, taking the wrong job, moving to the wrong place, but ignored it? And later they said, I knew something wasn't right. That was God's warning. And when sin starts to feel normal, you're in danger. The first time you compromise, your heart whispers, this isn't right. The second time, it's a little quieter. The third time, silence. That's when you should be afraid. When you no longer feel conviction. The world will tell you it's fine. Everyone does it. But God's warnings come in the form of conviction, in that small voice that says, turn back before you go too far. Do not let the world numb what God is trying to awaken. A man once stood at the edge of disaster, blind to what was coming. His family told him he was working too much, that he was losing himself in his ambition. His closest friends warned him that he was chasing the wrong things. Even strangers, people who had no reason to lie to him, made comments about how tired, lost, and disconnected he seemed, but he ignored them all. He thought he knew better. He believed he had everything under control, until one day everything collapsed. His health failed, his marriage fell apart, his career, which he had sacrificed everything for, crumbled in front of him. And in the silence of his brokenness, he realized something. God had been speaking all along. He just refused to listen. God often uses the people around us to warn us before disaster strikes. Sometimes it's a small comment that sticks in our mind. Other times it's a desperate plea from someone who loves us, urging us to slow down, to change, to wake up. But instead of listening, we become defensive, we justify, we push them away. We call them negative, envious, or simply wrong. Pride convinces us that we are the only ones who truly understand our path. But pride is a liar. It blinds us to the truth that others can see. It is not weakness to listen. It is wisdom. It is not surrendering control. It is allowing God to guide us through the voices He has placed in our lives. If the same message keeps coming from different people, if the same warning keeps echoing in your conversations, pause, pay attention. God speaks through others more often than you realize. The question is, are you listening? You try, you push, you plan, and yet nothing seems to work. No matter how hard you fight, the doors refuse to open. The opportunities you were certain would be yours slip through your fingers. The things you thought were meant for you drift further away. You call it bad luck. You call it misfortune. You blame the world, the system, other people. But what if the roadblocks are not the enemy? What if they are God's protection? There was once a man who had everything the world said would make him happy. A successful career, a beautiful home, the admiration of others. From the outside, his life looked perfect, but inside he was drowning. Every morning he woke up with a weight on his chest. Every decision he made felt forced, as if he were walking against the wind. He ignored it, kept pushing forward, convinced that if he just worked harder, the uneasiness would go away. But it didn't. It grew louder, stronger, more unbearable, until one day his life came crashing down. He had been so focused on what he thought he should do that he never stopped to ask if it was what God wanted him to do. And in the end, he lost the one thing he had ignored for too long: his peace. God speaks through peace. And when your peace disappears, it is a sign that something is not right. The human heart was not designed to function in constant turmoil. When your soul is at war with your choices, when your spirit feels trapped in a life that no longer fits, that is not just stress, it is a spiritual alarm. It is God trying to wake you up before it's too late. How many people have walked into the worst decisions of their lives while feeling uneasy but choosing to ignore it? How many have stepped into toxic relationships, destructive habits, and wrong directions, silencing the very voice that was trying to save them? That loss of peace is not to be brushed aside. It is not to be excused or justified. It is a divine signal, a sacred warning. When your soul is screaming that something is wrong, listen. Do not wait until regret teaches you what obedience could have prevented. When peace is gone, God is speaking. Heed His voice before it's too late. The first time it felt wrong. The first time your heart whispered, "This isn't right," but you did it anyway. Maybe it was a small compromise, a harmless decision, something you told yourself wouldn't matter. The second time, the voice was quieter. The third time, almost silent. And before you knew it, what once made you uncomfortable became normal. What once felt like a line you would never cross became a place you lived. That is how it happens. Not all at once, but little by little, choice by choice, step by step. And one day you wake up, look in the mirror, and realize you have become someone you never thought you'd be. At first you heard Him clearly. His voice was unmistakable, a whisper in your spirit, a stirring in your soul, a deep knowing of what was right. There was no confusion, no doubt. You felt His conviction, His leading, His presence guiding you, but over time, something changed. The voice that once spoke so loudly began to fade. The conviction that once burned in your heart grew dim. You still pray, still go through the motions, but something is missing. The connection feels distant. The voice you once relied on is silent. And you wonder, why isn't God speaking to me anymore? There was once a man who walked closely with God. He sought Him in everything, depended on His direction, and lived by His word. But one day God told him to do something he didn't want to do. It was difficult, uncomfortable. It required sacrifice. Instead of obeying, he ignored it. He reasoned with himself, pushed it aside, convinced himself that maybe God didn't really mean it. And for a while, life went on, but something was different. The clarity he once had was gone. The peace he once felt disappeared. The fire in his spirit turned to cold emptiness. Not because God had abandoned him, but because he had stopped listening. God does not stop speaking. We stop listening. Every time we ignore his warnings, every time we choose our own way instead of his, our hearts grow a little harder. The voice that once convicted us becomes easier to dismiss. The choices that once made us uncomfortable become easier to justify. And eventually we wake up one day and wonder why he feels so distant. But he never moved, we did. We drowned out his voice with our own desires, silenced his warnings with our own reasoning. And now we sit in the silence, wondering why we can't hear him anymore. The greatest danger is not that God stops speaking, but that we become so numb that we no longer recognize his voice. The longer we ignore his guidance, the harder it becomes to hear him. But the good news is, he is still there. He is still speaking. He is still calling. All it takes is a willing heart, a surrendered spirit, a choice to turn back. The moment you open your heart to listen again, you will realize he never stopped talking. You just have to be still enough to hear him. God is always speaking. He warns, he guides, he protects. But the question is, are we listening? Too often we ignore the signs. We fight for what he is trying to remove. We silence the voice that is trying to save us. We push forward when he is telling us to stop. And in the end, we wonder why things fall apart, why we feel lost, why we struggle in ways we were never meant to. But every warning from God is an act of love. Every closed door is a form of protection. Every delayed blessing is preparation for something greater. The moments when life doesn't go as planned, when peace fades, when conviction weakens, these are not coincidences. They are divine signals urging us to pay attention before it's too late. God does not remove things to punish us. He removes them to position us for something better. He does not allow waiting to break us. He allows it to prepare us. And he does not stop speaking. We are the ones who stop listening.